day broke gray and dull. The clouds hung heavily, and there was a rawness in the air that suggested snow. So begins the 1950 novel of Human Bondage. This is the third time I've read this book, and it brought me as much joy the third time as it did the first. And there's a lot to love about this book. And I will say that there are, for me, two moments in the book that are explosive. And I'm hoping we don't kind of give away those two moments, but if we do, we do. But I want to talk about a couple of things that I really liked that kind of make me want to go back and reread it just in excerpts. And that is, well, actually, before I do, the book title comes from Spinoza's idea on theology, right? So I do want to mention that the idea of human bondage, man's inability to have full control over his actions and thoughts, suggesting that even though a human being has the knowledge of good and evil, he might still struggle, right? He doesn't have full control over his thoughts and actions. And it reminds me of that scene in the book. So this is a story of really the author's life. And the author we're referring to, of course, is Somerset Maugham. And here's, do we have it? I don't know if we could see it. It's kind of bright, but anyway. Trust me, I do have the book in my hand.
It's a big one too.
And it's going to take a while to read. How long did it take you to read?
3 weeks, but I did pieces every day. But usually it doesn't take that long to read a book. But this one, I didn't want. Also, I took that long because I don't want it to end. It was one of those kind of books you don't want to end.
It's a life. So for me, it's hard to read the beginning of his life because Somerset Maugham's beginnings are very sad. He loses his parents very young. And there's a scene in the book where he blames a broken pencil holder. So he has a broken pencil holder. He's a young child and he's in class, and he starts to cry because his friend breaks his pencil holder, I think by accident. And he starts to cry, and the boy who breaks his is bullying him. Now, I don't know if you know this, Jacob, but Somerset Maugham had a stutter in real life. But in the book, his stutter is a club foot. So he has this kind of defect, this, in life, this physical malady. So there's a scene in the book where he starts to cry and he says, "You broke the pencil holder that my mom gave me before she died."
I like the accent.
Right? And the boy who breaks it accidentally or maybe purposely, it's a little pencil holder, maybe a nickel or maybe a sixpence, in English terms. The boy feels bad for doing it. But young Philip Carey starts to wonder, why did I say that lie? Because it's not true. He made it up on the spot. And he kind of mentions this idea of, why did I lie? What is this? It's this idea, this theme of not being able to control your emotions. Really, it is, I think, part of what is at the heart of this book, of this idea of controlling your destiny and not letting your emotions take over, which he often does. He often makes that mistake in this book. And so I'm going to mention a couple of things that I really like, but I'll let you talk about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love it. I shared it. It took me about maybe 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks to read. It's a nice sized book, but it was fun because it like Ruben shared, it takes you through a life of a man and his club foot. I mean, I think of the title of Human Bondage. In some ways, that club foot has been a bondage to him, right? And I think of the Apostle Paul, and I think maybe he was referring to this as well, where he had a an ailment. Maybe it was a some people think it was a hump, or and he had to deal with that, and he asked God to take it away from him. And there was a time in the book where Philip is asking God, "Can you please take this from me?" You know, and he prays and he really believes in it. And there are times in the book back and forth where he's dealing with spiritual matters, like he's questioning his uncle is a vicar, right? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, and he's a minister. And you see this type of character in some of Mom's books, and because his uncle really was, he really did bring him up, because as Ruben shared, in Felix and Philip's life, he lost his parents at a young age, and his aunt and his uncle. I'm not sure, is that in real life too? I believe so, right? I think
Yes.
his parents died as well at a young
Well,
age.
he does. He eventually rejects God, though.
Yeah, he does, but
So-
he is at times
He wrestles
with it. That's the good word. Wrestles with it. And then there's that one point where he prays and he sees that he still has a club foot. But I like it because another reason why I like the film is that he deals with relationships.
The film or the book?
I'm sorry, the book. I haven't seen the film yet, although that'd be something he could do. Sorry, the book. And so in the book, you see that he has these relationships with people, obviously, but also with women. And he has a number of women that he has relationships with. And the first woman he has is an older woman. And she is really somebody who I think opens up his eyes to relationships. And then once he's kind of like done with that relationship, he's a young man. He's going on to other relationships, but he's able to have that. He's able to do that. And but there's a one relationship, and I think Ruben, you talk about it later. It was with Mildred, this character.
No, I won't.
Oh wow!
I actually like. I mean, are you?
No, I was saying because she's a big piece of the story, because she comes in and out of his life towards the end, and she's somebody he comes to and he rescues and he takes care. I mean, he puts his whole life on the line for this woman.
So you're saying that you like the relationships with?
I do. What I'm saying is that
Philip Carey has two major romantic relationships, so it is a big part of this book.
It is,
and I remember so one of the explosions that happened for me anyway in the book is dealing with that second relationship with Mildred. And it's great. It's great. You know, I remember first time reading it, the way she maltreated him made me put the book down. I couldn't take it. How interesting that a book could do that in the age of our technology, where it had an emotional impact where I'm like, ugh, this is something I'm going to put down for a moment because it's hard to read. But can I point out the two things I really like, or at least the relationships? I really appreciated the minor characters. When you have this Philip who finally rejects sort of his uncle, the vicar, and tries to make it on his own through art. First, he studies theology in Germany, I believe, and then he ends up rejecting that. But when he goes to study theology and he's talking to Haywood and Weeks, there are these theological discussions between these characters that is really interesting. And I really appreciated this time the sense of character drawing of these men, young men. And then when they go to when Philip decides to become an artist and he goes to France, the minor characters that roam the art studios with Philip are fascinating. You have Clutton, Lawton, Finnegan, and Fanny Price. This character of Fanny Price is so unlikable, and yet you can't take your eyes off of her. She's so, I don't want to use the word despicable, but you could say that she's so rude to Philip. But what a person he is. Now think about this. These art students, they're all artists, but they're so different from each other. Wouldn't you say that a typical novelist would say, oh, here's the artist, there's the science guy, there's the nerd, there's the jock. We see this in movies all the time. But these are 4 or 5 artists drawn in very specific ways. I mean, what a character this Fanny Price is.
And it's like the post-impressionist era, right? I mean, they're just different artists, but they're handling it differently, for sure.
Handling it differently. I want to talk about, and I know I'm speaking too much, but I want to point out this insult. So this Fanny Price is one of the artists among several artists that are trying to make their way in the art world, whether it's through fame as an artist or through as a working artist making money and just getting by. But Philip is just trying for the first time, right? As the artist, and he looks at Fanny's pictures and he's thinking, I don't know, she's worse than me, right? And I'm pretty bad. I'm an amateur. But listen to this insult that this rude, this kind of detached art director, art teacher is going around. You know, we're supposed to encourage people when we teach, right, Jacob? This is what this art teacher tells Fanny Parker. He ignores her and ignores her. And finally, she complains to the head, the teacher is ignoring my work. Remember this?
Yeah.
This is what he tells her as he sees. So let me see your painting. She shows him the painting. And this is what he tells Fanny Price. What do you wish me to say to you? Do you wish me to tell you that it is good? It isn't. Do you wish me to tell you it is well drawn? It isn't. Do you wish me to show you what is wrong with it? It is all wrong. Do you wish me to tell you what to do with it? Tear it up. Are you satisfied now? That's a pretty deep insult.
Yeah.
And so those characters really add up to the power of the novel, because it isn't just Philip Carey, the mom, it is all the people that influenced him, and he wrote down and decided to create the characters that would eventually become of Human Bondage, the Painted Veil, the Razor's Edge, you know.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I like that event as well, that area, that time period of his life. Because if you look at our lives, we all have these time periods, right? When we're in our 20s or 30s. So this book takes you to his early, you know, his teenage years, his 20s, his 30s. And when you look at his time period in France as a painter, there's a time where he goes, am I good enough? And he asks a man to come in, who's the teacher, to come in and look at his painting. And he goes, wow. And he's quiet about it.
The same art teacher who destroyed Fanny Price.
He tells him, well, I mean, he's struggling with giving him, because he knows whatever he says is going to affect this artist.
And he might have been impressed that Philip really wanted to know.
He really did.
Wanted honesty.
And he was basically said, you are mediocre, right?
Yeah.
And Philip took it like, yes, I'm mediocre. And he was done. He was done painting.
Yeah.
And
what a lesson in being able to take a critique and with maturity, because he had to go back with the tail between his legs to his uncle.
Yeah.
Because his uncle warned him.
Yeah.
He had to tell him, I remember that.
Yeah.
He had to tell him, I don't want to be a second-rate artist. That's what I am.
And I can't remember if that's when he decided to be he went into doing bookkeeping for a while, like working with numbers and all that. But then he eventually became a doctor, or at least studied to be a doctor.
I do want to point out before we go too deep into the other things, and we don't want to make this video too long either, but these artists in Paris, to follow these guys, I'm telling you, Philip is just one of the characters. And I will say, one of the explosions that happened, for me anyway, I don't know how you took it, the surprise was with one of these artists, what was unveiled in tragedy with one of these. But there's a moment where they're just discussing art. And I wanted to read part of it. And it says, one of the artists, I believe it was Clutton, says he was at not the Louvre, because he was at a different different museum. He said he began to talk of the Olympia by Monet, and he says, I stood in front of it for an hour today, and I tell you, it's not a good picture. Lawson put down his knife and fork. His green eyes flashed fire. He gasped with rage. It's very interesting to hear the mind of the untutored savage, he said. Will you tell us why it isn't a good picture? Before the American could answer, Someone else broke in. Do you mean to say you can look at the painting of that flesh and say it's not good? I don't say that. I think the right breast is very well painted. The right breast be damned, shouted Lawson. The whole thing's a miracle of painting. And I share that because I think that is what makes the book different than maybe a typical story of a life.
Hmm.
You have these multiple characters that are just adding to the flavor of it. And just to sit back and read a discussion on art and theology between these characters that are characters,
Yeah.
is part of the fun of the book.
Yeah. Well, I like the love story. So in the end, there's these two characters that stand out. One of them shows love to Philip, like he never loved. No one's ever loved him before. Like his name is Thomas Athelstan. I think I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I think it's Athelstan, and he had a daughter named Sally. And these two characters, well, the father was just he had many children and a wonderful wife, and they just took in Philip and loved him and looked out for him. And when he was in a time of need, when he was in between figuring out what he was going to do with his life because he had no money, his uncle was basically cutting him off financially, and he's close to his death, the uncle. But Philip went to this man and looked at him as a father, and it was just wonderful. It was beautiful to see this relationship and how they looked out for each other. Well, at least Thomas looked out for Philip, but Thomas had a daughter named Sally, and she's just somebody who was a different character, a different woman he's ever met before. Beautiful, kind, but straightforward. Someone who was just going to be honest with him, and definitely wasn't like throwing herself at him. And he really definitely worked for her, and just to see that love come together, and then him. And I'm not going to spoil the ending or anything, but I will say this: his books, Mom's books, they always have a great ending, and you feel good about it, and you feel good like, wow, Philip has learned. And I will say, well, I'm not gonna spoil it. I will say this, that the ending does, it hits you, and you see, wow, this person has learned through his mistakes and learned through life's journeys, and is able to say, hey, I figured this out finally. And maybe he's like in his mid-30s by the time at the end of the book, I believe. Maybe
No
late
way.
30s.
Not even close.
You don't think
Not
so?
even close. No, because I mean, if you think about when no,
No.
well, in the book, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe in the book. I thought you meant um in real life, in real
Oh,
time.
no. In the book.
Okay.
I'm talking about Philip.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
but it's a life's journey still, and him
Based on his own life. It takes artistic license
He
and
does.
years, because he started writing plays and he really did become a medical student.
Yeah.
Mom, and start writing plays. I do want to say one last thing in terms of how to teach this book.
Okay.
This book taught me a new word, and it's the build. I don't know if I'm saying it right. It's the Bildungsgraben. The Bildungsgraben is a novel dealing with one person's formative years or spiritual education. So if you're giving somebody a student, if you are assigning a student an autobiography, how about if you, instead of writing an autobiography, they write a Bildungsroman, like of Human Bondage, they write a novel. Because if you write a novel, you could change the names and you could just let it rip. You could destroy someone's reputation, and you're not destroying the reputation, you're changing the names.
Yeah.
If you need to do that, but you probably shouldn't do that. But you can really tell the truth. Like Mom probably felt really free to tell his life in the form of characters.
Yeah. I mean, looking at that for myself, as I teach, I teach a lot of, my favorite time period is the turn of the century. And this is where the book is really coming from, the late 1800s to early 1900s. And I always like to the kids, we look at just how the Industrial Revolution really influences technology. I mean, people's lives and things that are being invented, that are being used by humans. But also, I don't really spend too much time on art. But with this book, I thought, you know what? I'm going to look at the Impressionists. I'm going to look at the realist and expose my students to that. I have some Impressionist paintings on my wall, and just to have those discussions and be able to have them be able to say, oh, that's a Monet, or that's Van Gogh, and and be able to speak to that
and argue.
And
that's a great idea.
And argue what's the best piece. Yeah,
because you could have somebody. I could see some people looking at something
Mhm.
and saying, I don't like it.
Yeah.
Like this character in this book. And then somebody else say, no, what do you mean? This
Mhm.
is perfectly,
Yeah.
and getting into into engaging and what it means to come up with a claim
Right.
and to
To
support
argue it. Yeah. That's a good point. Good little essay. Well, there you go.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you read the book of Human Bondage. It's thick, but
You'll
think
love
of
it.
it like this. It's like
You're gonna love it.
4 or 5 thin books.
Can I say it's my top 5 books of all time? And I really mean that. So
Top
read it.
5 novels or
novels.
yeah.
Yeah. Someday maybe we'll share our top 5 novels of all time. Anyway, this is definitely hit the top 5 now.
Okay.
So there you go.
Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.